So that was an amazing presentation. And of course, to you, our wonderful audience, you've been with us for 3 days now, over a 2-week period. And, personally, I think you deserve a double portion. Bosu has just given us a masterclass on leadership and the digital age. And he says this is now, a top issue for most organizations in Nigeria. I think it's a top issue for everybody, both at the organizational and individual level. Because of the importance of this topic for the global business environment, and particularly for us as HR leaders, we have a second person, a second technology expert, who will further expand the discussion about how the pandemic is affecting leadership structure in a digital world. Therefore, it is with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce the next speaker to the audience, my friend and my dear brother, Mr. Bolarinwa Abolade. Mr. Abolade is a technology entrepreneur, investor, and founder of the Idea Lab Group, among other companies. Prior to that, he was the CEO, and he was also part of the founding team that started up Soft Solutions Limited, a leading enterprise solutions provider in Nigeria. Idea Lab Group is involved in providing technology solutions for various sectors within West Africa. He's a first-class honors graduate of computer science with economics from the Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, and he also has an MBA from the University of Warwick, Coventry, United Kingdom, where his dissertation was titled "The Internet and its Effect on how small businesses compete." He's a keen student of entrepreneurship, I know that for a fact, and critical success factors for startups. An advocate of technology, he nonetheless believes that technology must be fit for purpose and stage of development of each organization. I'd now like to hand over the platform to Mr. Bola Ade. You're welcome. Bola, thanks for joining us from Canada.
Thank you, Emma, for that introduction, and all glory to God for the enablement to be at this event today. I'd like to give special thanks to the Covenant Nation and your pastor, as well as the Covenant Nation HR community groups. Thank you for inviting me. I'll dive into the presentation today. Let me just share my screen very quickly. Great. Can we all see the screen? Yeah, all right. So the topic today is how the pandemic is affecting leadership structures in the digital world. And I think Bosu has done a good job of walking us through the digital age, some of the products that have been developed in the digital age, the trends that are driving the digital age, the key guidance to individuals in terms of how do you participate and become a winner in that digital age. I'm going to be talking about organizations and how the digital age affects their leadership structure or dictates their leadership structure, and particularly how the pandemic is affecting them. I'll start with a meme that many of you have probably seen. It asks the question, who led your digital transformation? Is it your CEO? Is it your CIO? Or is it COVID-19? Well, as Bosu said, quite a number of people have had their digital transformation plans initiated by the reality of COVID-19. A number of organizations were not ready with or had not embarked on effective digital transformation at the time that the pandemic hit. It was only when they realized that, oh, well, we're not going to be able to sell, or we're not going to be able to interact with our constituents, that they started running around to see what to do to react to COVID-19 and to bring in technology into their organization. An example that readily comes to mind is Primark stores in the UK. Primark as a policy, even though they have a website, have essentially sold through their physical retail stores. When the pandemic struck and stores were closed down, Primark had zero sales, zero, absolute nada. Even though, a lot of stores had to be opened up in that period because their social infrastructure, government recognizes that you need to be able to go out and purchase things. Primark was not able to sell during the immediate aftermath of the lockdown period. Well, ironically, even after the lockdown period, it appears, for reasons best known to them, that they have continued to maintain their policy of not selling through their website. Time will tell whether that's a smart move on their part or not. That is their strategy, however. On the other hand, however, small retail grocers all over the world who suffered also in the aftermath of the lockdown as they could not sell, have been taking steps to address that. In Canada, for instance, the government paid for consultants that will help small retail stores to get their products online so people could buy from them. So the place where you go to buy your bread next door, or your cigarette, or something, all those small grocery stores, they recognized that they were a critical part of the city. And if COVID-19 was going to shut them down, then a big hole will emerge in the city. Apart from that, they occupy buildings. So if they get shut down, they are going to have those places locked up, with the possibility that miscreants will eventually take over. So the government invested in providing them with platforms that allowed them to make some digital sales. Here in Nigeria, we have companies like OPay who offer that to retail stores so that they could offer their products through their digital platform. Schools also, as we've heard earlier, have been particularly hit at. Many of them were poorly prepared to offer online education, and they scrambled to adapt video conferencing tools like Zoom, Teams, and Google Meet to offer some semblance of virtual learning. In some cases, they've adopted fit-for-purpose solutions like ULessons, developed by Sim Shagar. Many churches were also caught napping. They did not have the infrastructure for live streaming. They did not have infrastructure for engaging their teaming congregations in the sermon mode. And so they were caught napping. Many organizations had their digital transformation led by COVID-19. However, for a significant number of organizations, the answer to the above question is truly A or B. They had been embarking on digital transformation, driven by the CEO, driven by the CIO, driven by the board, driven by their strategy, even before COVID-19. They had in place the IT infrastructure. They had been putting in place the organizations to help to maximize those IT infrastructures. Some of them had succeeded. Many of them were struggling with it. They had some kind of hybrid system in place, or hybrid organization in place. They had all the technology, but adoption wasn't at the most optimal. Simple example: banks have always had online banking. Nigerian banks have had online banking for God knows how many years. I'm a technology person. For reasons of information security, I never trusted the online banking. So we did our banking the traditional way. When COVID came, well, we had to adopt those online portals and start doing our banking only through online banking. It became the only way we did banking thereafter. So yes, a lot of these organizations put in place these systems, but adoption was very slow. Adoption was very poor. Some people did, especially the younger generation. But a lot of the older people continue to use the traditional mode of doing things. Even the organizations themselves, yes, they try to adapt their structures for the digital age. But many of them, they tried a little bit, they didn't entirely work it through. What COVID has done has forced an acceleration of those digitization efforts. It has forced an acceleration of a digital-led transformation in many of these organizations. It's forced an acceleration of a change to their organization structures and to change their leadership structure. I'll just take a quick run through some history, just to give us perspective about the digital era. According to Wikipedia, there were two major periods of history where technology has impacted us, and they classify it as the pre-modern history and the modern history. And when you talk of the pre-modern history, we are talking of the prehistoric age, which was before we actually had paper and before we invented writing. And so we don't know much about what technology existed in those times. And then we had the Stone Age, where stones were fashioned as tools and used to do some form of writing by etching onto rocks and things like that. And we see those, I mean, we find those when we go back to historic times and, you know, find caves where people used to live, the caveman as depicted in that graphic. Well, the Stone Age was followed by the Neolithic Revolution. And the Neolithic Revolution essentially was the advent of agriculture. Before then, man was essentially a hunter-gatherer. Wherever he found food, he took. Wherever he found animals, he killed and ate. But with the Neolithic Revolution, man mastered agriculture and started to plant, started to breed livestock. The impact of all of that was that man who was a hunter-gatherer, who just moved from place to place, began to settle down, began to establish settlement. Once you start establishing settlement, the need for leadership structures emerges, right? If you put a group of people somewhere, some people are going to be paid. You need some leaders who are going to set the pace within those settlements. And so, you know, the Neolithic Revolution emerged, and with it also leadership structures that were appropriate for that period began to emerge. So post that, we had the Bronze Age, where bronze became the primary tool of work, and then we had the Iron Age, where, you know, iron became the primary tool of work. The pre-modern period came to an end with the Ancient Age, where all the materials of the three Age, I'm talking of stone, bronze, and iron, were brought together and used to improve and change life. This is the period where things like irrigation was discovered. This is the period where, you know, they utilized all this knowledge about stones and bronze and iron to begin to create war weapons and to embark on war. This is the period where art emerged. So that's the pre-modern history. And then after that, we had the modern history. And the modern history started with the first industrial revolution. Again, technology impacted the way we lived throughout this period. In the pre-modern era, the technology could have been stone, it could have been bronze, it could have, as we moved into the technological era, the technology that impacted became more cerebral. It became more a combination of creating things. So the first revolution that we had in the modern historical era was the first industrial revolution. And key to the first industrial revolution was standardization. This was the period where we began to come out with measures. So you could come up with kilograms, you could come up with units of measures, you could come up with meters. And the beauty about standardization was that all of a sudden, I could now come up with a recipe or a model or specifications for doing something. And whether it was done in area A or area B, it could be repetitively done. So that was the benefit of standardization. That was the benefit of having those measures. So if I was cooking beans, for instance, somebody would say, okay, take a cup of beans and this and that and that. Now, once you had standardization, you could get consistent results. So that was the first, that was the outcomes of the first industrial revolution. Now we moved into the second industrial revolution, where we took all this knowledge and we began to use it to create things that improved our lives, or things that affected our lives. We had the machine age, where machines became deployed in production, etc. We had the atomic age, where we learned how to use atoms to generate power, huge, humongous power. And that started after the World War and the dropping of the bomb in Hiroshima in Japan. Then we had the jet age, where geographic location became minuscule because we could travel same day. We could leave one part of the world and arrive at the next because we had air travel. We had very fast, very efficient air travel. And then we moved into the space age. And while the space age is still in evolution, one of the key advantages of the space age was that we could now put satellites up in space, and it enabled communication, instantaneous communication all around the world. And with that, obviously, we know what it implied. I could speak to somebody far away. Organizations could go beyond their geographical border. It became a lot much easier to manage things in far-fetched areas of the world. The digital revolution, which we are interested in today, is the third industrial revolution. There is a fourth one, which is in evolution, or which some scholars have identified, which is a further evolution of the third industrial revolution, of the digital revolution. The jury is still out whether we can clearly delineate it as a fourth industrial revolution. But when we talk of the third industrial revolution, the elements that we're looking at is digital transformation. And essentially that was the stage where we started taking our manual processes and the things we did manually, and we began to automate them. We began to compute, we began to maintain data, we began to use computers to do some of the things that we would ordinarily have done manually. And the information age, obviously, is when we started putting together all this data from doing all these activities, and then taking that data and utilizing it to get intelligence, to analyzing that data and saying, look, given the trends we've seen, predicting the future, what's the next stage. Also, part of that information age is when we brought data, I would say brought data to what I call the front end. The digital transformation, a lot of it involved what is called the back office and the mid office, where we said, okay, look, take what is happening in the organization, behind there, automate it, etc. But with the information age, we're moving technology into the front office, increasing interactions with people and stakeholders, employees, customers, etc. So you can now have self-service. You can now log in and do your payments on mobile. You can log in as an employee and put in your leave application. You can log in and ask for transfer. Essentially, we made the technology now easily accessible. The information age has also seen the advent of social networks, social media, Facebook, etc., because now people could utilize technology and utilize it in interactions. And the fourth industrial revolution, which we expect, is the imagination age. And in that imagination age, we're expecting that creativity will become the key force. It will become people who are creative will begin to out-earn people who are analysts. In the digital transformation, a lot of the top earners are analysts, people who can take data, analyze it, put out trends from there. But in the imagination age, this is the age where you have the Kim Kardashian, the Instagram age, the video age, the age where people go on to Instagram and they become instant creative sensation. They go onto social media and they become creativity becomes a big earner in that age. So we expect that's the imagination age that we're expecting. And then the next one is the emerging technologies age. As said by this earlier speaker, some of the technologies we saw in the third industrial revolution were actually considered emerging technologies when they came out. Now we see this as standard, and we're now talking of a new set of emerging technologies. And this new set of emerging technologies, we're talking of machine-to-machine communication. We're talking of Internet of Things, where you can actually hands up and the machine or the device begin to act on your behalf. They acquire intelligence and they begin to take actions on your behalf. I don't know how many of you use iPhones, but many of the iPhone devices today, they have a news app. And what the news app does is that it looks at what news you have been reading in the past, and it curates news for you based on the news you've read in the past. It just goes in there and it picks your habits and then says, oh, this person likes to read about Barack Obama. They'll just pick out everything about Barack Obama, and anytime you open that news app, you'll just find all of a sudden the things that you enjoy reading are the things that are being pushed out to you on that news app. That's the fourth industrial revolution that we're expecting. So that's a bit to give us some history. But the whole point of that history is to underscore the reality that technology and the technology eras have changed and are changing the way we live, the way we organize, the way we lead, and the ways we are led. Before the advent of communication technologies that underpin the digital revolution, the reach of a leader or manager was constrained. So in that age, we had very small and tight spans of control. There was a whole science that said a manager could not manage more than 7 people at a time. So the spans of control were kept very tight. But as technology has now allowed us to extend the reach of leaders and the reach of an organization, spans of control have also increased significantly. Organizations have become much flatter. These are the impacts that technology has on the way organizations are structured, on the way leadership is structured, on the way we lead, and on the way we are led. So we're going to go now into looking at, what do leadership structures look like, or what should they look like in the digital age? And before I dive fully into the digital age, I think to give it context, I'd like to speak briefly about, 2 eras of leadership and organizational structure that have preceded the digital era. The first is the scientific management. It's a precursor to one of the precursors to what we know today as the digital world or digital-led management. And the scientific management philosophy, Frederick Taylor, who was the guy who came up with the science of it, it became adopted across much of the Western world and even across Africa and across Nigeria, because frankly, when we grow up as kids, we grow up in, I don't know for many of you, but in my own case, you grow up in a very disciplinarian environment where your parents can tell you, do it because I said you should do it. Not do it because you are convinced that's the way it should be done. So they give you instructions and they use their authority to say, look, I expect you to follow it because I am your parent. I have authority over you. Today's younger people expect you to not flex your authority, but to sit down with them and say, you know what, child, this is why it is done this way. This is why you should do it that way. In the scientific management era or epoch, the viewpoint was very much the parent type, authoritarian parent type viewpoint. Look, people can be good if you give them a narrow set of tasks. So you break down the work for them into a narrow set of tasks, repetitive tasks, you define it for them, and you say, look, you just go and do this. Okay, you can do this. You are doing 10 today. I want you to do 15 tomorrow. I want you to do 12 tomorrow, right? And even till today, you still see organizations are structured very much in this silo type way. So you got a salesperson, and I say, look, all I want you to do is just sell. I don't want to hear from you about new products. Just sell. Go out there and sell. Your target is 5. Okay, tomorrow I want you to sell 10. And you just drive it around that narrow job specification. And in that model, it saw the hierarchical leader as the core creative force. It was more of a top-down leadership model. This model thrived for a while, and then eventually the world, moved towards what we call today quality management, the era of quality management. And in that era of quality management, people began to say, you know what, why don't we collaborate? Why don't we sit down and put together teams of creative forces, and let's take the ideas and utilize the ideas. So instead of somebody seeing just a small part of the work, they see the end-to-end of the work, and they can see, look, how we best optimize it. And they come with ideas, the team comes with ideas, and managers now look at it and say, look, how do we incorporate some of these elements of these ideas? It was no longer purely top-down leadership. It was a little bit more of a collaborative type leadership, but indeed the hierarchical leader was still seen as a superior creative force because he had to vet and approve whatever it was that that group, that team came up with. Today, we're talking of digital-led management, and for organizations who are transforming digitally, in order for you to get the most value out of the digital transformation, it helps to put in place leadership structures that are compatible with the digital world. How do we define that digital world today? Well, a number of you must have heard of VUCA. It's become a buzzword today, meaning volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It was, it was brought up, or was invented by the U.S. Army to describe the world in which they lived in which to describe the threat that the United States face. Today, if we look at Nigeria, many will agree that we are not too far from a VUCA environment. What with the NEPA issues and these issues, there's so much volatility in the country. So even in our own microcosm of Nigeria, I mean, VUCA is rather quite relevant. But even if you take it globally today, yes, in the past, a lot of uncertainty was driven by wars, it was driven by political forces. Today, it's driven by innovation. The rate at which things keep changing, the amount of data that we accumulate as people, creates such uncertain environments for business that we need to rethink the way leadership structures are set so that it is more appropriate to deal with the challenges of the VUCA environment that we all face today. And so when we look at digital-led management, what are the elements that we see in a digital-led, or the principles that a digital-led management must underscore, leadership structures in such organization must enable? It must enable creativity rather than just productivity. So rather than just, okay, how many numbers? We're going to say, look, how do we deal with this challenge? So for today, taking a simple example today, salespeople have been able to sell, the model always is that, look, face-to-face interaction, relationship building, etc., etc. But today, when you cannot meet, customers don't even want you to come into the office. How do you build relationships in a virtual ecosystem? That requires creativity. And people are going to approach it in different ways, depending on what their skill sets are, depending on what their strengths are. But right now, the VUCA environment requires that we encourage that type of creativity rather than just productivity. Okay, how many meetings do they have today? I mean, some people may not have that much meeting, but they're able to reach out and build relationships in the virtual world. So creativity rather than productivity. It also requires, that environment requires that the ultimate process of setting skills in Zua, making it accessible to people who are less skilled so that we can easily, move people around. And also so that, some who are less skilled can be skilled up, and the automation makes it easy for them to be integrated into the work process. Today, with the environment we have, work needs to be distributed over time and geography. I mean, with the pandemic, with the COVID-19, we didn't have a choice. People had to work from home, right? So in North America, for instance, in the city of San Francisco, which is where Silicon Valley is based, a lot of the companies have closed their offices till next year. So what have the employees done? Many of the employees have canceled their rent. They have sold their properties or putting their properties on the market, and they're traveling to families, wherever their families are. Because in any case, San Francisco always had a very frothy real estate market, always very expensive real estate. So yeah, people are saying, okay, well, I don't need to be in the office. I don't need to pay this high rent to be in San Francisco. I don't need to maintain this very expensive property. And property prices have crashed in San Francisco because people are just, moving out of the city. Because now they can work from wherever they may be around the world. And that's the reality that we have also faced with the pandemic here in Nigeria. Work has had to become distributed over time, over geography. Now, people routinely take meetings on Saturdays, when before, you could only come into the office for meetings Monday to Friday. So even time, work has been distributed over time. So in this digital-led world, work also needs to be driven by thoughts rather than muscle power. It's not just about how much you're doing or how hard work it is. It's about how effective. So we're moving more towards the spectrum of effectiveness than efficiency. This environment also creates opportunities that are not predictable. It creates opportunities, it creates challenges that are not predictable. How do we react to that? Leaders need to be facilitators with empathy. And so the structure that works in this digital-led world is a bottom-up leadership approach. rather than an approach which says, look, I'm the creative force. How are you the creative force driving people when people are sitting in far distances in their homes? Right? They need to be able to look, how do I move the organization forward?
Sorry, Bala, you have about 5 minutes left.
All right. Thank you, Emma. All right. So in this digital-led world, we need to allow people to lead, so take ownership. We need to make it easier for people to contribute. We need to give them space and time for creativity. It influences who we hire, who we let go. You know, we also need to ensure that we are building a diverse team. I mean, who do we hire? We want people who are self-starters. We want people who are going to have that creative capability that Boston spoke of earlier, right? We don't want people who are just going to come, they want to push paper. We want people who are going to be able to sit down and say, look, you know, we've got this challenging situation. How do I bring creativity to those challenges? So those are the kind of people we want to hire. And, you know, those who don't fall into that category are the kind of people we want to let go. Look, let me also clarify here. Organizations are not homogeneous organizations. There would be certain units within the organization where the Frederick Taylor model, the hierarchical scientific model, still continues to be the dominant type of structure that you need in order to get results in that unit. There are going to be other units where creativity is required. But yes, the pandemic has shifted the pendulum more towards the creativity spectrum because we're all dealing with something new to us. So you want people within the organization who can take this new points of information, new data, and say, look, you know, how am I productive for my organization within, you know, these new challenges? So who is hired, who is let go, and what of diversity? The more diverse teams, evidence shows that the more diverse teams, the greater the performance. So in this new, in this digital world, leadership is distributed through flexible teams. We're creating flexible teams. You know, which one organization that clearly gets this right is the church. The church works with teams, committees all the time. And I guess that's how this HR community group has also evolved. They've been able to put different people with different backgrounds, different specialities together to organize this kind of programs and this kind of events. It also requires, however, openness to partner with both internal and external parties where needful. And we try to make the organizations more flat so that career paths are shorter. Information comes very quickly from the bottom to the leadership so that resources can be allocated behind those creative ideas. These are the changes that we need to make to get our leadership, to our leadership structures in a digital world. Now, it doesn't mean that, I mean, as good as it is, a lot of organizations struggle with being able to put these digital-led leadership structures in place. When we look at the statistics, only 5% of organizations are, you know, typically successful. 19% fail, but you know, it's not as bad as in conventional transformation. In digital transformation, 19% of them fail. But the big problem is that most people just settle for some dilution of value or some mediocre kind of digital transformation. And that, I believe, is where a lot of organizations were when the pandemic hit. What the pandemic has done is accelerate the movement towards fixing the issues, fixing the areas where we have settled for less, to say, let's utilize technology more. Let's bring it, let's change our organogram, let's change our leadership structure to be able to take advantage of these technologies. I think that's where the promise is for those of us in HR to say, look, how do we restructure our organizations, or those parts of our organization where digital, where creativity is important, how do we restructure them for a digital world? All right, so what has been the effect of the pandemic? As we know, work has become distributed over time and geography. There's more premium on creativity rather than traditional productivity. Unpredictable opportunities and challenges have crept up. And hierarchical leaders have less control over their workers' time. I mean, As much as I'm a technology person, there are times when you want to be able to know, okay, well, my team are coming in at this time and they're leaving at that time, right? But in this world, you've got to get used to the fact that, okay, I cannot physically see my team walking in or see my team walking out. What's important is the outcome rather than just being able to say, look, he came in at 9 and he left at 5. And what we need now are self-motivated worker leaders. We need more bottom-up leadership. We need ad hoc teams to respond to the crises that are coming up, to respond to the VUCA environment in which we're operating. And we need companies to adapt elements of their digital-led leadership structures to be able to take advantage of digital transformation. That's all in essence for the presentation. What I've just done in this last slide, because I understand that there was some interest in that, is to identify some of the tools that you can use in the digital world. And some of the tools that are today enabling the kind of digital-led leadership structures that we've spoken about in this presentation. So I just stop it here so that we can take questions and have some conversation around this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bola. That session went very, very well. We learned a lot about what we had to expect now that I don't know whether we're in the 4th or 3rd revolution right now. Okay, we only have time for one question. And someone asked the question about, he says, you keep on talking about balancing outcomes and processes, focusing on outcomes. He says before, what everybody was interested in were the processes, but now you're saying the focus should be on outcomes. So he wants to know, he or she wants to know more. That is Oluwapelumi Shoyemi. Sorry if I did not get your name properly. Wants to know more about this. How do we balance outcomes, and processes?
Well, a lot of leaders have struggled with the idea of leadership structures in a digital world. And the reasons are simple. One, their ego. 2, they're worried that when they let go, there will be chaos, right? You've got performance pressures. Processes give you reason to trust that if I follow this process, I will get certain outcomes. So the focus traditionally has been to say, look, follow that process. It's tried and tested. This is how you do X. This is how you build a pipeline. This is how you sell. This is how you develop an application. Just follow that process. It's tried, tested, and proved. What they're looking for is to say, look, how well are my people? Am I organizing my people to follow that process so I can get the results that I need? But in this digital-led world, we need to step back a little bit and allow people to get the work done because there's so much uncertainty. Even the processes that we were so sure would work as we had initially thought they would work, we're finding that there are curveballs that are coming at us around those processes. And so that's why I say, look, we need people who are creative. So instead of saying, okay, look, I've got to follow process because my manager or my leader says I should follow process, they're sitting down and saying, you know what? Yes, I follow the process, but I'm finding something here that doesn't add up. Yes, it's taking me a bit of time. It looks like I'm going on a tangent, but at the end of the day, the objective of the organization, I'm able to meet it by bringing my creativity to play. Managers need to give that tolerance. Leaders need to give that tolerance for that creative element to come in the world in which we operate today, and give a little bit of time, space and time for people to achieve that result. What we need to do and do right is to set the context as leaders, to say, look, this is where our organization is going. These are our goals. These are our objectives. And then enable our people, giving them the resources, giving them the team, giving them the support to be able to work and achieve that. Yes, they can have the processes as guidelines, but giving them the flexibility to say, look, if I find that this works better this way, let me bring my creativity to play and do it that way. Now, there are some industries like banking that are very regulated, right? And so there's a regulator cost. If you exhibit creativity too much, there's a high risk of regulator cost. You can get penalized by the central bank. In those industries and in those areas, yes, maybe you do need to follow process. As I said, organizations are ambidextrous. There's no, it's not, I don't believe that you should do a one size fits all, or you should do, the same across the organization. Some elements, you will find parts of your business that allow creativity. So in banking, it could be in the areas of creating products, but there are some elements of your operation, like in transactions, where you do need to follow process. Otherwise, CBN will come at you. So in those areas, you do need to stick to that.
Okay, so we're actually done, but one more question has come in, and I think I have to be a little bit partial here and allow the question to be read. Oluwatosin Oyebola would like to know how we align measuring outcomes with leading and lagging performance indicators. How do you align measuring outcomes with leading and lagging performance indicators?
Look, we will always have performance management. We will not throw performance management out of the window because we are saying we are moving into a digital-led world. We will always have performance management. And institutions, organizations are set up to achieve certain outcomes. And so if we're finding that people are not performing at the level, the indicators that the performance is not meeting up, there's a need to sit down and talk with them with empathy, talk with them honestly. Criticism should not disappear in the digital world. Workers are not babies, right? My approach to this is treat it like your kids. You want your kids to be the best version of themselves. So you're going to give them from time to time tough love, but you're also going to give them, real love. And that's the reality. We've got to have empathy, but at the same time, we've got to be able to pull people back and say, you know what, these results aren't working right. What are the issues? And then we've got to listen. Okay, if the guy is coming up and saying, look, I've got this creative idea that I'm thinking would be the best way to do it, then leaders, managers must be empowered to be able to say, okay, yes, performance seems to be lagging our expectations, lagging our indicators, but there's a reason why. And could this be something that could benefit the organization? And then to be able to say, okay, well, you know what? Let's give that person the space and the time to bring that creativity to bear. But critical to making this work is that we also have the right kind of people within the organization. Right? I ask the question, who do you hire? Who do you fire? The right kind of people, the right kind of culture, all this contributes to being able to make it work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bola Abode. Wow, it's been really a full meal, and I have enjoyed myself. That double portion from you and Bosu, you really let us understand how the digital age is going to help us as HR leaders. Well, we've had a wonderful time, and I'd